Alright, kia ora tātou, ko Helen O'Sullivan toko ingoa. Ko aho te kai whakahaere matua o Crockers Property Group. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Good evening, everyone. My name is Helen O'Sullivan. I'm Chief Executive of the Crockers Property Group. It's great to have you all here with us. Ko Victor Jamieson tēnei mana hutu o Crockers Community Living Management. I'm really pleased to introduce Victor Jamieson, who's the General Manager of our body corporate Community Living Management team. Kia ora, Vic.
Kia ora, Helen. Hey, everybody. Good evening.
Ko Joe Schellack tēnei, mana hutu o Crockers Property Management. I'm also really pleased to introduce to you Joe Schellack, who's the General Manager of our Property Management team. Kia ora, Joe.
Kia ora, Helen, and welcome everyone this evening.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're talking this evening about healthy homes with a specific focus on how that compliance pathway might be altered if your rental property is in a unit titled property, that is one with a body corporate involved. We will also try to cover some of the other community living or community titled entities as we go, but the form of entity we are focusing on is body corporate, just because the Unit Titles Act gives us a bit more certainty in terms of the ownership of these things, which drives a lot of the decisions, which I think you'll see as we go along. Just a spot of housekeeping before we go any further. If you submitted a question during the registration process, hopefully you'll find that we've covered it in the content of this webinar, unless it was a very specific question about a particular property. Specific questions related to an individual property, if they fall within the domain of your body corporate, which is something you'll probably understand better once we get to the end of this seminar, should be referred to your account manager. And of course, if we're your property manager, then to your assigned PM. If you have questions as we go through this session, the chat function in this webinar has been disabled, but you can post questions using the Q&A function that you should be able to see at the bottom of your screen. We'll address as many of them as we've got time for during this session. If we can't, we will endeavour to follow up or point you in the right direction afterwards. You will also get a copy of the slides that we are going to show you, so don't worry about trying to capture anything that's written on the screen. All registered participants will tomorrow get a copy of the slides as well as a link to the recording. So if you're sitting comfortably, we'll begin. Okay, so first up we're going to do a quick recap of what is required by the standards and what the deadlines are, or in some cases were. We'll talk you through HomeFit. Then we'll get into the detail of where the requirements of the Healthy Homes regulations are going to rub up against the realities of retrofitting some of these things to existing multi-unit developments, and then how some of the exemptions that do exist may help you with that, and further what you'll need to do in order to be able to claim that exemption. Then we'll cover off who has to do what between the owner and the body corporate and who pays, and spoiler alert, almost all of the time it is going to be the unit owner. But we'll get to the detail of that as we go through it. And then finally, we've got some tips and tricks and some further resources for you. So that's the broad outline of it. Without further ado, let's get into it. Joe, by way of a really quick overview, first up, what areas do the regulations that we're talking about tonight cover? And broadly, what's the intention of the changes?
Well, Helen, the regulations we're talking about tonight cover the list you can see on your screens now. They're targeted at areas expected to make a big difference to the comfort and health of occupants of rental properties.
Okay, so starting to make a dent in the poor state of our housing stock then, hopefully. All right, so what are the timelines?
So again, as per the slide on your screens, there are a couple of dates in the rear vision mirror which you need to be complying with now around statements and tenancy agreements for insulation and insurance. And coming up, we have two key deadlines. One which was changed recently to 1 December 2020 for all new and renewing tenancy agreements needing to have a full compliance statement setting out how the property performs in respect of each of the 5 new compliance standards. By 1 July 2021, the property must comply with those requirements. If the landlord is relying on any of the very specific exemptions that might be applicable, that has to be included in that statement as well.
Thanks for that, Joe. So what you're saying is that by 1 December this year, 4 and a bit months from now, if I'm a landlord, I need to know how my property performs against those standards and be able to confirm that in writing to my tenant. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Victor. And there's a form you need to fill in, as you'd expect, called the Owner's Healthy Homes 13A statement.
Okay. And then I've got until 1st of July next year to do any of the work that my statement from the 1st of December this year shows is needed, yeah?
That's also correct. You're doing well. So while you might think that slightly less than 12 months to get the work scoped and completed doesn't sound too bad, you need to bear in mind that there are thousands of rental properties in New Zealand in the same boat, all of which are going to have to be compliant by that same date next year.
So what you're saying there, Joe, is that come June next year, the contractors that are going to be able to do this work are likely to be pretty busy, right?
Yeah, you did right, Helen. If experience has taught us anything around insulation and how much of a drag that took out of the insulation industry, it really will pay to plan ahead. So don't wait till June 2021 or you're likely to get caught short.
And just on that, Joe, is it compulsory to fill in the statement and meet the standard? Or can I just agree with my tenant that we're happy with the home and don't need any paperwork?
No, Vic, it's compulsory. This is one of those acts that you can't contract out of, as a lot of the RTA is in fact the same. So that means no document that says you've opted out is legally binding. And there are penalties for claiming that you comply when you don't, or that you don't have to comply when you do, all enforced by the Tenancy Tribunal and MBIE. So doing nothing can get pretty expensive.
All right. So we're pretty clear then on the urgency and the necessity for this. So let's move to HomeFit. I know it's an initiative from the New Zealand Green Building Council, and that HomeFit's a companion product to the HomeStar rating system for new builds, but not much more than that. Can you take us through HomeFit, please, Joe?
Sure can. So we talked earlier, Helen, about the healthy home standards being aimed at lifting the bar on the quality of rental housing. So HomeFit is aimed at pretty much the same thing, measuring that bar to some extent. You mentioned HomeStar. Well, that's a measure applied to new buildings, and it runs from HomeStar 6 to HomeStar 10. The higher the number, the better the building performance. So the idea is that HomeStar rating gives a homeowner or occupier a sense of the level of performance of any given new build home. The HomeFit measure is a tool designed in the same way, but for existing buildings, and similarly is intended to indicate a warmer and drier home.
Sounds intriguing, Joe. Is a HomeFit rating compulsory though?
No, it's not. So unlike the healthy homes requirements, which are compulsory, HomeFit is totally optional. It's a measure that can add value to your home as a rental prospect, as a point of difference, helping you to attract good tenants. And if you happen to be selling, it's a great signal to landlords or owner-occupier buyers alike of the home's quality, much the same as HomeStar is for new builds. So from April this year, if a home meets HomeFit, Auckland Council are planning to add that information to the LIM report of the property. And, you know, we think HomeFit is a real value add for a rental property. For some homes, there's not a huge difference between the work required to meet healthy homes to be able to get to the HomeFit certification as well. So as part of what we're doing for our clients, we're assessing rental homes we manage for HomeFit at the same time as we're doing the healthy home assessments.
Mm-hmm. All right, fantastic. We know broadly then the key areas that are covered by the Healthy Homes regulations. We're clear on the timeline. We know we have to do this, and we also know we have to get started with it quite soon. And now we know what HomeFit is and that it can add extra value to the home's rental and sales value. So that's our background sorted. Let's get into the meat of this thing then. How about we go through each of the standards in turn and talk about the standard generally, and then kind of flip to where that's going to get a bit interesting if we're dealing with a multi-unit dwelling, shall we?
Yeah, sounds good to me, Helen.
Yeah, let's go.
All right, fantastic. First things first, probably the one that we hear the most about. Joe, Healthy Homes heating standard, 60 words or less, go.
All right, up for the challenge. To meet Healthy Homes heating standard, the home's main living area must have one or more qualifying heaters of at least 1.5 kilowatts each, capable of heating the space to 18 degrees, when it is 0 degrees outside, and this heater must be a fixture and supplied directly to that room. Right, how do I do it with that one?
52 words, awesome. You've clearly done this before. Okay, and how do I know how much heating I need, as in how many kilowatts I'm going to need to meet that 18-degree standard?
So the government's released a heating calculator, which is available on the MBIE website, but be warned, even though it is a calculator for people to use, it still requires a fair bit of technical expertise and data on R values and things like that. So you can do that, or as we're doing with our portfolio, hire a qualified assessor to carry out this and all of the other assessments.
Sure, okay. And you mentioned the main living area. What if the home's got 2 living areas or a lot of bedrooms?
It's just the main, as in the largest living area, that needs to comply. So nothing to do with bedrooms in these regulations.
Okay, that's really good to know. So look, really important question, and again, we do hear this one a lot. Once I know how much heating I need in the room in terms of kilowatts, does the heating device have to be a heat pump?
Yeah, we get that question a lot too in property management, Helen. The short answer is no, it doesn't have to be a heat pump. Although, of course, it can be, and quite frequently, given their power to weight ratio, so to speak, the heat pump would be the ideal. And in line with that, some of the kilowatt ratings that are required at the moment, really only heat pumps can do that to be able to meet that expectation. If exemptions apply that mean a heat pump cannot be used to meet the required heating level, then the next best comes into play. So if the heating standard can be achieved by having an electric heating device other than a heat pump, that device has to be bigger than 1.5 kilowatts, but no more than 2.4 kilowatts. And it does have to be fixed or attached to the room in some way, like mounted on a wall, possibly permanently wired into the power socket, basically so it can't be simply picked up and moved somewhere else.
Right, okay. So, Vic, I'm an owner of a rental property in a unit titled apartment building. I need to meet this standard, and my assessment report says I need a heating device affixed to the wall in my apartment. The assessors recommended a heat pump as the most efficient option. What challenges can you see in that? Okay,
well, retrofitting a heat pump to an apartment is going to require a few things that will involve the body corporate. There's the placement of the inverter unit, also known as the outdoor unit. There's the drainage for the condensation resulting from the operation of that outdoor unit. Penetrations in the cladding to allow connections between the outdoor unit and the indoor unit also need to be And lastly, we need to think about the location of the indoor unit on an inter-tenancy wall, i.e. a wall which divides your unit from another space, whether that space is a common area or another person's unit. So let's deal with these in order. Placement of the outdoor unit. A lot of multi-unit developments either don't have balconies, or if they do have balconies, don't want owners putting the outdoor units on their balconies.
Sure.
And they can actually stop them from doing so through the operating rules of the multi-unit complex. So if you have a balcony, you're probably going to need body corporate's permission to install the outdoor unit on your balcony. If you don't have a balcony though, there really aren't many options. In most buildings, it's going to be incredibly difficult to retrofit the piping required to use any other external space, such as the roof, which is where you'll often see the outdoor units in many new built apartment blocks. If you've got a balcony and your BC is amenable to putting the outdoor units on your balcony, next you'll need to deal with the drainage issue, right? So condensation needs to go somewhere that is suitably discharged from the property, and just stripping down the side of the building simply won't cut it. You'll need body corporate permission for correct placement of the drainage. Now, the need for penetration in the cladding to connect the indoor and the outdoor units, this is a biggie for many multi-unit complexes, especially those that have been repaired after weather tightness issues. You simply can't go drilling holes in the cladding of your unit without body corporate permission. So you must ask for permission, which you might not get. And without permission, you can't install the heat pump. Drilling holes could compromise the weather tightness of your entire building. And if you did that, there's a strong chance that anything goes wrong in the future, you'll be liable for all the resulting costs, which isn't going to be great. On the other two items regarding placement of the indoor units are probably relatively easy to resolve. If you're planning anything destructive which touches property which isn't yours, you'll need permission from the other owners, which in the case of common property is your body corporate. And in the case of the neighbouring unit, it's the owner of that unit.
Alrighty, that's quite a hefty list, Vic. Thank you. So look, there's quite a lot of points there where a body corporate acting quite reasonably might say no to a request for permission to make those changes, right? Particularly that cladding issue. So Joe, where would that leave us on the healthy homes front? If the VC says no, I don't want people whacking great holes in the cladding, which is a view I can entirely sympathise with.
Yes, I can totally understand that myself, actually, Helen. The regulations do provide for this. There is an exemption available if the landlord doesn't own all of a part of the building that is necessary to achieving that compliance. So in the case of a unit title building, if compliance with the standard requires that the landlord has permission to make use of common property and that permission is declined, the landlord may be able to rely on that exemption.
You say may, Joe. I'm hearing a but.
As is often the case with laws and regulations, there is a but, correct. The landlord can't just shrug and assume that the body corporate will say no. They have to use reasonable endeavours to comply, and what constitutes reasonable endeavours will depend on the circumstances. But at the very least, you'd want to involve asking the question. You also can't ask a question, then vote against reasonable provisions that might make it possible. Say you've put in a request to the body corporate, they've raised it at AGM, and then it's noted that you've voted against raising funds to do a particular thing. So that's not going to go down too well. It's all going to come down to what the Tenancy Tribunal considers reasonable in the circumstances. So if you're going to be relying on this exemption, it will definitely pay to have the written advice of a suitably qualified professional when you make your decisions on this point, and also make sure you're keeping the documentation from the body corporate if they've given you advice that says, no, you can't do that, and here is the reasons why. Okay,
and so I've got that confirmation from the VC, I can't put the heat pump in. From what you said earlier, I'm going to have to use best endeavours if I can't use a heat pump. Would that be right? What might that look like?
Yeah, that's right again. So you want to keep it all recorded, of course, as you want to rely on the exemption, but then you'll have to use the next best solution. So if a heat pump is what's really required to meet the standard, but you're not allowed to install one, then next best would be an electric heater with a thermostat of at least 1.5 kilowatts, or as close as you can get to the required level of kilowatts that are needed to heat the place to the standard, and it has to be a fixed unit in some way.
Right, okay, got that. All right, that's heating. Insulation requirements, Joe, what's required here?
This one should be relatively easy, and I'm going to assume that any landlords watching right now are well aware of what those standards are at this point, because they've been in place for a number of years now. Unless you've recently bought your rental property or converted an owner-occupied unit since July last year, there's no real change to the requirements that came into effect as of July last year. Insulation has to meet R values shown, should be on the slide that's popping up there. With an R value being a measure of resistance or how quickly heat is lost through that material. It's a measure of how well it works, essentially. Different measures apply in different parts of New Zealand. So what we're showing here is for Auckland, and there are other parts of the country can be found on the MBIE website.
And like a rich sort of data, this MBIE website. Okay, so Vic, how do you see the challenges here for a rental that's in a body corporate?
Yeah, well, I guess there'd be a few questions here. What about if an apartment above, if I have an apartment above or below me? Do I need to get the R values of the intertenancy floor? And is the apartment above my roof or do I need to know about the apartment that eventually has the roof above it, even if I'm on the first floor of, say, a 20-story building? The next issue is probably more about practicalities. How do I find this information? Does the body corporate have it, or if not, do they have to find it out for me? What's the story there, Joe?
So the first part to that is surprisingly easy, Vic. If you have a living space above or below you, then you're entitled to an exemption from this part of the standard. So the standard only applies where the habitable space is low. So if you're the top floor apartment, you might be able to rely on that exemption because you have an apartment underneath you, but there will not be an apartment above, so there's no habitable space above, in which case you'll need to comply with the roof insulation requirements. As to how you find that information, that's a little bit more tricky. This will be a similar issue as many standalone homeowners as well, in that you'll probably need the services of a professional to assess the status of your individual apartment. It won't be the body corporate's job to have that information or to find it for you. Your apartment is private property, and remember, the body corporate is only concerned with the common property. So some good places to look might be the council file, which you can purchase by approaching your local council. And certainly if it's a new build, you might have information pack there from the developer, or be able to query them on it if it's been bought and built quite recently.
Okay, so if I can just to backtrack very slightly, Joe, to make sure I understood that, if I have an apartment above me, then I'm exempt from the ceiling requirements. If I have an apartment below, I'm exempt from the underfloor. But if I am, say, the top floor apartment, I got an apartment below, I'm good for the underfloor, but I'm going to have to comply with regard to the roof because I've no apartments above me, just a roof. Is that right?
Yep, that's 100% correct, Helen. Yep.
Beauty. Glad I picked that up. Cool. Okay, we're on a roll. Joe, ventilation requirements. What do we need here?
So first up on ventilation, we've got opening windows. So every habitable space, so that is lounges, bedrooms, have to have windows that open. Can be fixed open, so held open, they're not just going to flop shut on their own. And the area of the opening window has to be at least 5% of the habitable space. There are some pretty technical exemptions to this if there are no opening windows in a required area, but those are best explored with the specialist.
Okay, thank you, that's great. But there's more to the ventilation piece than just the windows, right?
Correct, yeah. Also under the ventilation standard are kitchen and bathroom extractor fans. Essentially on that front, all cooking and bathing areas are going to need these to be present. There's a bunch of really detailed rules about the size and airflow of those extractors, and again, you can find all of that on the MBIE website.
All right, fantastic. Vic, I'm sensing from you there might be a few issues here as well for some of our multi-dwelling units. Would that be right?
Yeah, you read my mind there, Helen. I mean, the key issue here is the one we've talked about previously. To install an extractor fan, if there isn't one already in place, will mean I have to make a hole or penetrate in the building envelope. That's going to be impinging on the common property. What if my body corporate says no, Joe? What do I do then?
Well, there are two exemptions that could apply here, Vic. One is that umbrella exemption that we talked about before. That is, the landlord doesn't own 100% of the property and can't get permission to meet the standard. If they've used reasonable endeavours, they should be able to claim the exemption. That's what we talked about a bit earlier. The second exemption that applies to the extractor fan requirement is that of being reasonably practicable to install an extractor fan. So if, for example, your kitchen would need a magic skyhook to suspend the extractor fan over the cooktop because there's no wall or anything to affix it to, the exemption may well be available. Just like the other points we've talked about, though, you need more than just your own opinion on that to back it up. So you would need to get the written opinion of a suitably qualified professional, someone who installs them for a living, if you're planning to rely on this.
Okay, so onwards to moisture and drainage. Joe, what have you got for us here?
So this one is relatively simple, but in the way of regulations, sounds very complicated once it's all in the legalese. First off, you must have a moisture barrier built and installed by a professional to the modern standard if there is a suspended floor and the underfloor space is enclosed or 50% of airflow is blocked by anything such as earth or planking or cladding or anything like that. And secondly, there's drainage. You've got to have enough to cope with the normal sort of rainfall, and it has to take the water away to the appropriate sort of place.
Right, so essentially it's got to work so that the property isn't just one big puddle every time it rains. I can cope with that. So far so good, but Vic, I can hear you thinking about an issue here with the multi-dwelling units, yeah?
Yeah, yeah. Again, you'd be right there, Helen. Not so much with the moisture barrier, more with the drainage. Hey, Joe, what if the building has, say, old and rusted out gutters that need replacing? But I'm only one owner of say 8 in the complex. Do I have to pay to get the guttering fixed on my own so that I can comply in time?
No, that ownership exemption would apply, Vic. But again, subject to the caveat we talked about in terms of acting reasonably, you have to put it to the body corporate and ask that it be fixed and keep raising it until it is. Logically, if your gutters are leaking, the whole building's value has been eroded anyway if you don't address it. But if your BC needs some time to raise funds, for example, to cover the cost, you should ensure that you put forward and have noted a motion in the AGM minutes on the issue. That will help you to create the paper trail needed to demonstrate you've used your best endeavours to get the problem addressed.
And presumably by the time when the BC approves that resolution, I also then have to vote in favour of providing the funds to the body corporate to pay for the work. That'd be right?
That would be a very good idea, yes.
Yeah, gotcha. All right, on to the last one of the standards then, Joe, draft stopping.
Right, for draft stopping, essentially there can't be holes in walls or missing windows or any gaps around things that are going to mean that the property is subject to unreasonable drafts. Mm-hmm. This includes open fireplaces, not that they're very common in apartments and multi-complexes, but they are in some of the older ones or some units. The reason that includes fireplaces is because unless they're in use, they really are just a big gate, big hole, big window to the outdoors that you can't close. There is part of the regulations say that tenants can request in writing that the landlord leave them open for their use. But really for the fire risk alone, we recommend that open fireplaces are blocked up safely, of course, so tenants don't go starting fires in a grate with a closed off chimney above them, which would not be a good look. And don't forget, if you leave them open, realistically, most insurances require that they're checked and serviced at least annually, so there's ongoing costs to leaving it open as well.
Sure.
The other point of note about this requirement is that unreasonable doesn't take age and condition into account. So if you've got a new build property that's only a year old, or if you've got an older property that's 140 years old, the same standard applies.
So what you're saying there is the answer can't be blowing in the wind.
Oh.
Is it too early for dad joke? All right. So Vic, look, are there any issues you see in the draft stopping standard from a multi-unit point of view?
Not really, to be honest. This one seems relatively straightforward. Although, just one point, a lot of modern apartment buildings incorporate mechanical ventilation systems. I'm assuming, of course, that those are not considered draft sources, Joe, is that right?
Yeah, you'd be correct in assuming that, Vic. Mechanical ventilation systems are a building element and therefore not considered a draft source.
Right.
Okay, alrighty, that's brilliant. That's been really informative. Thank you, Joe. So, Vic, I'm a landlord of a property in a body corporate. Whose responsibility is it to work out if my rental property complies with the Healthy Home standards?
Yeah, that one's pretty easy, Helen. A unit is private property, whether you rent it out or live in it yourself. And private property is the responsibility of the owner, while the body corporate is responsible for the common property. So it's the responsibility of the owner of the unit to comply with the legal requirements of renting it out. If you have a property manager, they should be offering you some assistance, of course.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that, of course, is differentiating a property manager, which is Joe's job, to body corporate secretary, which is your team's job. Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So, look, if there's work that needs doing, within my unit, which would need the body corporate's permission, what should I do about that?
Look, the first thing to do would be to lodge a request with the body corporate committee through us as your secretary. for the work you need or want to have done. You'll need to provide enough information to enable the committee to assess the impact of the work, how it impacts on the common property and what the issues might be. If it's a simple issue and there's really a simple yes or no answer, that might not take long. However, if it is a bit more complicated, it may need to wait for a general meeting of the body corporate. In the meantime, Joe, would I be right in thinking that the owner will want to have on file the response from the body corporate?
Yeah, they would. Yeah, that's correct, Victor. If you're going to be relying on the exemption that comes with not owning 100% of the building, you'll need that as evidence that you can't yet comply, especially when you come into that 1 July deadline next year. Don't forget that you need to be using best endeavours in the meantime.
Okay.
Alrighty, so Victor, I'm now on the committee of a body corporate that has a number of owners who are asking for permission to install heat pumps in their apartments and everything that comes with that. What do I need to be doing with that one?
Jeepers, Helen, you've got a lot of hats on tonight. Okay, so your committee is going to need to consider those requests. Firstly, you'd probably want to respond or have us respond to the owner saying that the request has been received and will be considered. You should then add it to the agenda for the next committee meeting, and the issue should be given reasonable consideration. It is important to note that whilst the body corporate can say yes, they may attach some reasonable conditions like the owner is required to use a reputable professional to carry out the works, or promising not to make any holes in the building envelope while carrying out the work. The body corporate can also say no, and where, for example, you've just done a heap of work on a reclad, there will probably be very little argument if you decide to say no to people wanting to make penetrations into cladding.
Okay, so what about if there's something just isn't that simple and we need, as a committee, we need professional or technical advice on which to base the decision? Is it reasonable for the body corporate to ask that the cost of that advice be covered?
Look, our view is yes, that would be a course of action open to the committee. I mean, if the committee can't form a view without expensive technical and or legal advice, the committee can say no unless they are able to get technical or legal advice and the costs of seeking this advice are covered.
Okay, all right. So there's another reason to be very grateful to those members of our community who are good enough / brave enough to serve on the committee.
Yeah.
Presumably, too, there could be additional secretarial costs involved in dealing with all of this?
Look, Helen, there very well could be, because Healthy Homes is outside of the parameters of our service level agreements, and therefore additional costs might apply. To be honest, it would really depend on the complex, though, based on how many requests we receive, how deeply we have to get involved in the process, or they ask us to get involved in the process. Sure. Your account manager will be able to provide information related to your specific complex.
All right, very good. So it seems there can be quite a bit of work in this, and we've already ascertained that this is going to be the owner's task, not the body corporate's. So, Vic, you mentioned earlier that if you have a property manager managing your rental, they should be providing you some assistance with this. Joe, what's the Crockers property management team doing for its landlords in this space?
Well, we're actually doing quite a bit in this space, Helen. We've arranged for all of the properties in our rental portfolio to be assessed for Healthy Homes and HomeFit standards. Our landlords pay a good discounted price for the assessments because we've commissioned the assessments in bulk. We're getting them all done, and they get the HomeFit assessment as well, so they know where they stand on that front. Certainly with HomeFit, we're expecting that to be gaining more traction in the future as well, so it's good to get that information along with the Healthy Home standards. Absolutely. The resulting report identifies what needs doing to reach the Healthy Home standards and each criteria, and if something isn't to the correct standard, then we also get quotes for that work to be done. If there's only minimal work involved, we get it done. Otherwise, we discuss the report with the landlord, work through the process with them from there. If there's only a small distance to travel to HomeFit as well, then we'll talk about that as part of the process.
All right, sounds like a pretty comprehensive package, Joe. Hiring your team sounds like the best answer all round, quite frankly. Do you do anything extra for Crockers body corporate clients? Has Vic wrestled with you for something special for our team?
Yeah, I can tell from his laugh that yes, he has. I mean, he's been advocating for the body corporate clients that he's dealing with there. We do have a special offer for anyone who is in a Crockers managed body corporate but isn't already a Crockers property management client. If anyone's interested in that, contact details for our property management new business team are provided at the end of this presentation, and you can just flick us an email and we'll be in touch.
Alrighty, that's excellent. Nice work, Vic. Well done, Joe. Look, so other than the obvious one of hiring your excellent and clearly highly professional team, Joe, any other handy tips on compliance?
Other than start early, of course, the main thing is documentation. Keep everything, starting, of course, with the property assessment. If you carry it out yourself, which we just don't recommend, it is quite difficult to do, but you can. Document your workings, certainly with the with the heating calculation.
Sure.
If you get advice from a professional, get it in writing and retain it. Keep your correspondence with BC and be ready to fill in that 13A come 1 December. The big part of all of that, keeping records, is actually forms part of the standards. It's one of the regulations of the standards about what records you must keep to be able to prove compliance or not. And certainly MBIE will be out there asking some questions, I believe.
Alrighty, fabulous, thank you. Look, we also have some coming soon material. We're just putting the finishing touches on a series of bite-sized webinars which cover, we're working with mortgage brokers, the lending department, and with chartered accountants William Buck on this. There's some tax and some lending incentives that are available which might help you as landlords. Some of those tax breaks are part of the government's COVID response and might be available to landlords as, you know, assisting you to cover the cost of funding improvements to reach the healthy homes and sometimes even HomeFit compliance. So those webinars, they'll be bite-sized, and details on how to advance register will be in tomorrow's follow-up email, so keep your eyes peeled for that as well. Alrighty, so moving swiftly on, the next slide has got some key resources for further reading, which you might also find useful. Of course, all of those very handy links will be in the set of slides that you get tomorrow, with a link to a recording of the session. Now, we've sort of reached the 40-minute mark, but we do have a few questions. I'll just have a look at these and see if we can cover any of these. We can cover any of these off at the moment. One of them is a question about a specific complex. I'm going to have to ask you to put that one through to your account manager, because there's bound to be, if I try to answer it here, I will no doubt get it wrong, and then I will be in trouble, won't I, Vic? Somebody's asked, and I'll put this one to you, Joe, how do you justify 1 degree for Auckland versus 2 degrees for Wellington in the heating equation?
Not sure I understand that question, actually, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think that's suggesting that Wellington requires 2 degrees and Auckland, I think, yeah, I'm not entirely sure we totally get that one, so I'll move swiftly on. But fundamentally, I guess, the heating standards, the standards around the levels you have to reach have been set by MB. So we actually haven't had an opportunity to have an input into those. So where parts of them may seem unreasonable or a bit out of whack, that isn't something that we've actually had a hand in doing. Joe, is infrared heating an option?
Well, potentially it is. I mean, if it's a fixed electric heater and it is compliant with the kilowatts needed to heat that space of the habitable area, then that's potentially an option. There's no rule that I'm aware of that says it has to be a specific type of electric heater, other than it has to have a thermostat and it has to be fixed.
Okay, all right. Another question here around heating. Can you install a permanent thermometer to demonstrate it's always at least 18 degrees without any heating installed? So I suppose we're talking there about a passive building which might actually maintain the building at that constant temperature. It's actually a really interesting question. Do you know the answer to that, Joe?
I can't give you a specific answer, but I do know that there are some exemptions on the heating standard for certified passive buildings, but I couldn't answer the technical details of what constitutes a passive building. but there is something in the regulations that do allow for that. I don't think that there's a lot of actually certified passive buildings in New Zealand though, so I would tread pretty carefully on trying to rely on that exemption. But I'm sure if you've got the certification that shows that, you should be able to rely on it.
All right. We have a question here. My understanding re the heating requirements is that it can be a fixed electric heating unit, but you seem to be pushing that the heat pump is a must be considered first option. Surely it's just another alternative. It's certainly not suitable for RBC. I think possibly Joe.
Yep, I can answer that one.
Sure.
The requirements for the heating is all based on the kilowatts. So depending on what kilowatt is needed to heat, in this case I'm assuming it's an apartment, based on that heating calculation, once you're ranging into the sort of 2.53 kilowatts plus, there's not really many, if any, fixed electric heaters on the market that I'm aware of anyway that would meet that criteria, which is why you would have to look at the heat pumps as the first option. The other thing on that front is the government standards actually say that you can't use an electric heater if it's more than 2.4 kilowatts. A fixed electric heater, you'd have to use a heat pump if it's over 2.4 kilowatts. So in this circumstance, if we sort of run through what we've talked about in this webinar, if you really should be using a heat pump because it's something like 5 kilowatts needed to heat the apartment, but you've approached the body corporate, it's documented that they will not allow for those penetrations to take place, then your next best option, which you can certainly go for, is a fixed electric heater as close to the standard as you can get.
Sure, fantastic. All right, here's one here for you, Vic. What happens if there is non-habitable space below the apartment, for example, a common area garage? Joe or Victor? I'd be thinking a non-habitable space. We're going to need the underfloor heating, are we not? The underfloor insulation. Would that be right, Joe?
Yep, if it's not a habitable space, then yes, the underfloor insulation requirements will be in play, which means that you would have to go through the process, I would imagine, of figuring out if there is insulation there or not. And if there isn't, similar sort of thing with the heating and penetrations through cladding is approach the body corporate around if it doesn't have insulation, is there permission to install it? I would imagine that the answer to that will probably be no due to costs and other implications to that. But certainly, yeah, if it's a garage, that's not a habitable space.
Okay, all right. That's a similar one we've got further down. Do you have to comply with underfloor insulation if your apartment is on the ground floor?
You do not, as long as, and there's not many scenarios I can think of where an apartment building wouldn't have a concrete base. Certainly for some unit title properties, like some older blocks of units and things like that, they may have a cavity underneath that bottom floor, in which case you would have to go about looking at complying. But if you've got a concrete base and you're on the bottom floor of an apartment, then you would not have to comply because there's no way that you can install insulation. What you would need to do, though, is note the exemption that you're relying on in that respect and have that documented.
Well, this is where the reports from the professional are going to be tremendously important, really, aren't they? We've got one person asking, you mentioned we can get the slides, but can we also get a copy of this session with all the useful video and comments? And the answer to that is very simple. I can answer that one. Yes, you will. Tomorrow when you get the slides, you will also get a link to a recording of this session. So if your sound has went in and out at any point, then you should be able to fill in the gaps from that as well. All right. Somebody's asked, I'm a private landlord. How would I be checked if I met the requirements? Joe, you can probably answer that one. So I think we're saying there, I'm a private landlord. I just have, I don't have a property manager. How might it happen that someone would be checking whether or not I meet the requirements?
All right, so there's two reasonably common ways these days where that could happen. One is if you're collecting a bond from the tenants and lodging it with the bond centre, MBIE investigations team are actually keeping tabs and randomly auditing people who've lodged a bond recently.
Okay.
Yeah. And that is in line with them trying to ensure that people are doing what they should be doing. And they see that as the best way of saying, hey, well, there has been a new tenant put into that property, so has the landlord done everything that they should do, not only with meeting the requirements, but also putting the required statements and things onto the tenancy agreement. And the other way is actually the tenants themselves. There's been a lot of promotional activity going on from tenancy services and MB and other government departments around tenants' rights and getting them aware of what the requirements are for their rental properties that they're living in. And, you know, with more and more tenants becoming aware of their rights, the more likely it is that they will be fishing for a bit of compensation if they think that someone hasn't done the right thing. And just to finish that off, one of the big things is in all of this, there are fines attached to it. So not only, you know, make good orders that can be made and compensation, but actual fines. And those fines, once they're paid, tend to be given to the tenant as compensation. So, you know, there is incentive there for tenants as well to be going, hey, can I find a chink in the landlord's armour and try to get myself a bit of cash? And certainly not all tenants are like that, but there will be some out there trying.
So you could lose both ways. You have to comply and you pay a fine for not complying. All right. This is one, Joe, you and I discussed yesterday, just actually out of interest. Somebody says we've installed shower domes into all of our rentals, which totally eliminate the need for ventilation and moisture. Does this comply? Now,
well, in the technicalities of the legislation and the standards and the regulations, there's nothing in there that says installing a shower dome would make you compliant to the standard. However, I guess it depends on whether you're intending to rely on an exemption or not. So, for example, if you were had an older property body corporate, something that was really old and didn't at the time it was built have you know, extractor fans installed, then there's, as I say, it's quite technical. You really need to go and read it for yourself. But there is the ability to rely on exemptions if it was legal to not have ventilation when the property was built. But again, best endeavour would be, well, what can you therefore do to help with moisture issues or things like that? And a shower dome would be a good option in that case. Okay. But I don't think that you would be able to say, hey, my extractor fan's broken, I'm not going to fix it, and I'm just going to put a shower dome in. I don't think that would meet the requirements.
Right. But if you were saying, I can't install an extractor fan because the body corporate won't give me permission to make a hole in the wall, but I have installed a shower dome, that may well tick you off. But again, this is where having the advice of a professional assessor is going to be quite an important part of demonstrating your compliance. Alrighty. A really quick, easy one, Joe, for you. Is a fixed gas heater that has a flue able to be used to comply with the heating requirements?
Yes, is the answer to that. So fireplaces or flued gas fireplaces will meet the standard along with those other options of a fixed electric or a heat pump.
An unflued gas heater.
Unflued gas heater. Sorry, no.
Yeah, no. The question was flued. So, but I'm just kind of expanding on it. So, yes, right. So a flued one, and no correct. To an unflued one.
That's absolutely correct. And the reason for that is, you know, gas heaters that are unflued pump a lot of moisture into the property, so therefore detrimental to all of the rest of the standards and the point of them. Cool.
All right. Victor, one for you. It's like Christmas Day, handing out the gifts. In a building complex, should landlords expect assistance and advice from body corporates regarding heating options and arranging bulk fitting, etc.?
Oh, sorry, that I didn't catch it's just moved.
So if you flick to the answered one.
Yeah, answer one.
And
assistance and advice from body corporates
down at the bottom.
Options. So the account managers that look after your complex are able to assist with providing advice on heating options and also
to an extent.
To an extent, and we'll also be able to refer you to someone in Joe's team who will be able to give further information if required.
But I guess in terms of arranging bulk fitting, I guess we've talked about this as an option.
Sorry, I missed
challenge.
that part, yes.
Yeah, the challenge with that, I think we've always found, is that not all owners in the body corporate are landlords.
Landlords,
so
yes,
you
right.
run into an issue where the owner-occupiers don't want to be paying for services which are being provided just to those who own the rental apartments. So we've looked at trying to coordinate it, but the challenge does become sort of trying to share those costs when they're actually not evenly distributed. If you happened to have a BC where 100% of the owners were landlords, it might work, but very few of our BCs actually fall into that category.
Yeah, trying to identify the landlords versus the non-landlords, etc. is very difficult.
Okay.
Right.
Then I've got sort of a combined question. What happens if a landlord in a body corporate puts a heat pump onto a private balcony without body corporate approval and causes leaks through the penetrations or from leaking condensation, meaning who would be responsible for any damage that resulted from that?
Well,
I know the answer, but I'll let Vic answer that one.
Well, that one there is, it would be, so the landlord has put a heat pump on a private balcony without BC approval. So as we discussed earlier, you need BC approval and cause the leaks. So the person that would be responsible would be the landlord.
So in other words, not something we recommend by any stretch of the imagination.
Very bad idea. Very bad idea.
Thank you, Deb. Another one for you, Joe. Do the new requirements apply to existing tenancies or just new or renewed ones?
So from 1 July, let's start with 1 December. So from 1 December, it is new and renewed tenancies who are required to have the statement as part of the tenancy agreements. From 1 July 2021, the same applies for the regulations to be met and for that statement to be included. It is on all new and renewed tenancies. The catch there, I guess, is a lot of people don't realise that variations to agreements or tenants, if you've got like multiple tenants on a tenancy agreement and one moving in and one moving out, that type of thing, that all constitutes a new tenancy agreement, at which case you would have to provide all the information and you would then have 90 days to actually get everything compliant with the correct standard. We really recommend that you try to actually aim for full compliance by the 1 July 2021, because otherwise you're going to end up with a number of other landlords, I would imagine, who have left it waiting. Oh, we've got a long-term tenant, they're not going to move out for another few years, so we'll deal with it then, and then you get notice. And then you have, once you've got that new tenant, you've got 90 days to get everything up to scratch. And if that involves a reasonable amount of work, one, it's a lump sum cost that you might not have prepared for, but you suddenly have to pay, but you actually have to pull it all together and get it ready and done within that 90 days. Everyone must be compliant, no matter what, by 1 July 2024.
Right. Okay. So the thing is, though, what you're saying is if you're relying on the fact that you've got an existing tenant from the 1st of July 2021, if that tenant suddenly gives notice, you've got a 90-day window in which to get compliant. Okay, so that sounds like it could be a little bit dangerous. Okay, so we've answered that one. I've only got about 5 minutes left, so I'm just going to see if I can find anything else that is going to be kind of broadly. Okay, now one here, this one, Victor, you and I can probably discuss. Somebody said, look, given the design and building structure of many multi-units would be identical, apart from top and bottom floor units, how much guidance/assistance is the body corp providing? So not each landlord is trying to understand compliance independently and try to understand what we need to comply. Can we combine efforts somewhere for each building, especially when the owner is based overseas? Now, again, we looked into this earlier this year, didn't we, in terms of trying to combine this. You just want to talk to what some of the challenges are in trying to do any of that through the body corporate structure or the secretarial function that we manage?
Yeah, so again, the challenges with respect to you've got to deal. So you've got not the body corporate itself may not be full of fully have landlords in there, and so the challenge is trying to get the body corporate working with the committee to deal with the landlords only, and you're invariably going to impact the other tenants or owners that aren't landlords. Is the biggest challenge, is trying to get all of the people in agreement, so that you can do the assessments.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, that's where the biggest challenge lies, because not everyone tends to be a landlord within a complex.
Yes, and I think to that point about owners being overseas, quite often we find that the people who are on the body corporate committee, who might be the people to take the lead on this, are owner occupiers, and so not that inclined to kind of give up their personal free time in order to deal with issues that really don't concern them, because if they're owner occupiers, they don't need to comply with this. All right, so look, I think on those ones...
Can I just chip in 2 cents on that one? Sorry, T?
Of course.
The one thing I would say is, notwithstanding all those issues, would there be anything that would stop, say it's a unit title block and it's reasonably small, there's 10 in the block and all 10 of the owners are renting out their properties, would there be anything to stop them getting together with their committee and deciding to get an assessor in and negotiating a fee to get all of the ones assessed at the same time or something like that?
Nothing to stop them doing that and taking the lead on that, I wouldn't have thought. But it's something that those owners would need to take the lead on, as opposed to something that would be effectively funded out of the body corporate secretarial function at this stage. That'd be about right, Vic?
Yeah, that's right. And I think if I heard you correctly, Joe, in that particular one, you were saying that all of the owners were landlords, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's quite a different kettle of fish, because they all have the same vested interest, and therefore it is there is value in doing that.
All right, very good. Okay, look, we've reached 6:59 p.m, so we've pretty much reached the time that we set aside for this. I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us here this evening. We really do hope this has been helpful and useful to you. We do have a few more questions there that we've been unable to get to this evening, but we will endeavour to follow up on those of them that we can, or hopefully some of the additional resources that we've sent your way may be of assistance. Thank you all very much for your time this evening. Thank you for your trust in giving us your body corporate to manage, and those of you that do your properties to manage. We look forward to your time, to catching up with you all again soon. Ngā mihi nui and ka kite.